The stranger rode into Belmont, Nevada, on a Tuesday morning in late August of 1883, his horse kicking up dust that glowed amber in the rising sun. And Hannah Zimmerman knew the moment she saw him that her carefully ordered life was about to unravel in ways she could never have anticipated. She had been loading supplies into the back of her father's wagon when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up from counting sacks of flour. The man sat tall in his saddle despite what must have been days on the trail, his hat pulled low against the glare, his shoulders set in that particular way of someone who had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. Hannah found herself staring longer than was proper. Something about the way he moved with his horse, rather than simply riding it, catching her attention in a way she could not quite name. "You going to stand there gawking, or you going to finish loading that wagon?" Her father's voice cut through her thoughts like a knife through butter, and Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert sun already baking the main street of Belmont. "Sorry, Pa," she said, turning back to the supplies Mr. Henderson was stacking on the boardwalk outside his general store. She was 22 years old, far too old to be caught staring at strange men like some starry-eyed girl just out of the schoolhouse. Thomas Zimmerman grunted and went back to talking with Mr. Henderson about cattle prices and the drought that had been plaguing their corner of Nevada for the better part of 3 months. Hannah hoisted another sack of flour, feeling the familiar burn in her shoulders and back. Ranch work had made her stronger than most women of her acquaintance, though her mother had despaired of her ever developing the soft hands and gentle manner that were supposed to attract a suitable husband. Her mother had been dead 5 years now, taken by pneumonia one brutal winter when the doctor could not make it through the snow in time. Hannah had been 17 then, and she had stepped into the role of running the household without complaint, managing the ranch hands' meals, keeping the books, and helping her father hold together the sprawling cattle operation that had been in the Zimmerman family for nearly 30 years. "Excuse me, madam." The voice was low and rough, like whiskey poured over gravel, and Hannah nearly dropped the flour sack she was hefting. "Wondering if you could point me toward whoever might be hiring around these parts." She turned to find the drifter standing just a few feet away, and up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought. Maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of slate under a stormy sky. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and dust covered him from his worn hat to his scuffed boots. But there was something in the way he held himself that spoke of pride despite his obvious circumstances. "Depends on what kind of work you are looking for," Hannah said, setting the flour sack down more carefully than she needed to. "You have ranch experience. Born to it, madam." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that managed to be respectful without being obsequious. "Zachary Lawson. I can handle cattle, horses, mending fence, whatever needs doing. I am a fair hand with a rope and I know my way around a branding iron." Thomas Zimmerman had stopped his conversation with Mr. Henderson and was studying the stranger with the assessing gaze he usually reserved for livestock he was considering purchasing. Hannah knew that look well. Her father was a shrewd man, slow to trust, but fair once you had earned his respect. "Where you coming from?" Thomas asked, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "Utah most recently," Zachary said, meeting her father's gaze without flinching. "Before that, Wyoming. Been working ranches since I was old enough to sit a horse properly. Can provide references if you need them, though I will admit they might take some time to verify, given the distance." "Why leave Utah?" Thomas pressed. "Man does not just drift from state to state unless he is running from something or running towards something. Which is it?" Hannah saw something flicker across Zachary's face, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. Not running from the law, if that is what you are asking. No debts, no angry husbands, nothing like that. Just figured I would see more of the country while I am young enough to do it. Heard there was good ranch land in Nevada. It was a reasonable answer, Hannah thought, but there was something he was not saying, some deeper truth hidden beneath the simple explanation. Still, she found herself hoping her father would not dismiss him out of hand. They could use another pair of experienced hands at the ranch, especially with Roundup coming in a few weeks. You understand the work is hard, Thomas said. Son here will bake you like bread in an oven come midday. We have been in drought for months. Water is scarce, which makes the cattle ornery and the horses worse. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You sleep in the bunkhouse with the other hands, you eat what my daughter cooks, and you follow orders without question. Cause any trouble and you are gone before you can blink. We clear, Crystal, sir, Zachary said. When can you start? Right now, if you need me. Thomas considered this for a long moment, then nodded sharply. Finish helping my daughter load this wagon, then follow us back to the ranch. We will get you settled, and I will introduce you to the foreman. He will tell you what needs doing. Appreciated, Mr. Zimmerman. Zachary touched his hat brim again, this time including Hannah in the gesture. I will earn my keep, I promise you that. As Thomas went back to his conversation with Mr. Henderson, finalizing their purchase, Hannah found herself alone with the stranger who was now apparently one of her father's employees. Zachary moved to the supplies without being asked, lifting the heavy sacks with an ease that spoke of real strength beneath his trail-worn clothes. You did not have to do that, Hannah said, reaching for another sack. I have been loading wagons since I was a girl. No question you are capable, madam, Zachary replied, swinging a sack into the wagon bed with practiced efficiency. But my mama raised me to help when I see work that needs doing. Besides, your father just gave me a job. Seems only right to start pulling my weight immediately. There was something disarming about his straightforward manner. None of the false charm or crude attempts at flirtation she had endured from some of the other ranch hands over the years. He worked steadily beside her, loading the supplies in a way that showed he understood how to balance a wagon for travel over rough roads. You really been working ranches your whole life? Hannah asked, curiosity getting the better of her usual reserve. Since I was about 8 years old, Zachary said. My father had a small spread in Colorado, nothing like what your father seems to have here, but enough to teach me the basics. After he passed, I worked for other ranchers, learning what I could, trying to save enough to maybe start something of my own someday. I am sorry about your father, Hannah said softly. Was a long time ago. Zachary's voice was matter of fact, but Hannah heard the old grief beneath the words. Bronk threw him wrong, broke his neck. He died before the doctor could come. My mother had already passed a few years before that, so I was on my own. Been that way ever since. Hannah understood loss, understood the way it carved out spaces inside you that never quite filled in again. My mother died 5 years back, she offered. Pneumonia. Sometimes I still set out 4 plates at supper before I remember. Zachary paused in his work, really looking at her for what felt like the first time. His gray eyes were surprisingly kind. That is the worst part, is it not? The forgetting and then the remembering all over again. Yes, Hannah said, grateful to have someone put words to the feeling. Exactly that. They finished loading the wagon in companionable silence, and Hannah found herself reconsidering her first impression of the drifter. There was more to Zachary Lawson than dust and worn clothes. Something solid beneath the surface, something that resonated with her own carefully hidden depths. The ride back to the ranch took about 45 minutes, following a rutted road that wound through sage-covered hills painted in shades of gray, green, and brown. The drought had been hard on everything, Hannah thought, watching the landscape roll past. The grasses were sparse and yellow, the few creeks they crossed reduced to muddy trickles. Even the sky seemed bleached, the blue washed out and pale. Zachary rode behind the wagon on his bay gelding, and Hannah found herself glancing back more often than necessary, checking to make sure he was still following. Each time, he was there, sitting easy in the saddle despite what must have been considerable weariness from his travels. The Zimmerman ranch spread across a valley where sage gave way to better grass, fed by a spring that flowed from the hills to the east. Even in the drought, the spring had not failed completely, though it ran lower than Hannah had ever seen it. The main house was a solid structure built from local stone and timber, with a wide porch that caught the evening breeze. Behind it stood the barn, the bunkhouse, several corrals, and various outbuildings accumulated over 3 decades of operation. Cattle grazed in the distance, scattered across the valley floor, too many to count at a glance, but fewer than there had been before the drought forced her father to sell off part of the herd. They had kept their best breeding stock, gambling that the drought would break before they ran out of water entirely. "Home," Thomas said with obvious satisfaction as he pulled the wagon up in front of the house. 17,000 acres, give or take. Best ranch in this part of Nevada, and I am not just bragging. We run about 800 head right now, down from our usual 1,000. Should build back up quick once we get some rain. Zachary had ridden up beside the wagon, and Hannah watched him take in the spread with an assessing eye. Whatever he saw must have impressed him because he gave a low whistle. "This is some operation, Mr. Zimmerman. You have good reason to be proud." "That I do," Thomas agreed, climbing down from the wagon seat. "Come on, I will introduce you to Cal. He is the foreman, been with me 15 years. Good man, knows the ranch inside and out. He will tell you what you need to know." As her father led Zachary toward the barn where the foreman would likely be working, Hannah began unloading the supplies. She had hefted 2 sacks and was reaching for a third when a voice behind her made her jump. "Let me get those, Miss Hannah." It was Sam, one of the hands who had been with them for about 2 years. He was a competent cowboy but had an unfortunate tendency to stand too close and let his gaze linger where it should not. "No need for you to strain yourself." "I can manage, Sam," Hannah said firmly, maintaining the distance between them. "I know you can," Sam said, his smile showing too many teeth. "But what kind of gentleman would I be if I let a lady do all the work?" Hannah bit back the observation that she had been doing this work long before Sam arrived and would continue long after he moved on. Instead, she simply stepped around him and carried the sacks into the house, making it clear through her actions that his help was neither needed nor desired. By the time she had stored the supplies in the kitchen and pantry, nearly an hour had passed. Through the window, she could see her father showing Zachary around the property, pointing out various landmarks and facilities. The foreman, Cal Brennan, walked with them, a lean man in his 40s with sun-weathered skin and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Hannah pulled the makings of supper from the pantry, settling into the familiar rhythm of cooking for a household of men. She had learned her mother's recipes by heart, could make biscuits and stew and pie without conscious thought. Her hands moved automatically, chopping vegetables, seasoning meat, stoking the fire in the big cast iron stove. The kitchen windows were open to catch any breeze, and through them drifted the sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering in the corral, the rhythmic clang of a hammer on metal from the blacksmith shed. These were the sounds of home, as familiar to Hannah as her own heartbeat. She found her thoughts drifting to the new hire, to Zachary Lawson with his sad gray eyes and quiet manner. There had been other drifters over the years, men passing through who stayed a season or two before moving on. Some had been good workers, some had not lasted a week. She wondered which category Zachary would fall into, then chided herself for wondering at all. What did it matter? He was just another hand, nothing more. But even as she thought it, she knew it was not quite true. Something about him had caught her attention in a way the others had not. Some quality she could not quite name, but felt nonetheless. Supper that evening was a boisterous affair, as it usually was, with 8 ranch hands and her father, all gathered around the long table in the dining room. Hannah served beef stew with biscuits and gravy, along with dried apple pie for dessert. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who had worked hard all day and would work hard again tomorrow. Zachary had been given a place between 2 of the other hands, Jimmy and Porter, both reliable cowboys who had been with the ranch for several years. Hannah noticed that Zachary ate without drawing attention to himself, listening more than talking, answering questions when asked but not volunteering much about himself. "So you worked up in Wyoming?" Jimmy asked, mopping up gravy with a biscuit. "Hear the winters up there are something fierce." "Cold enough to freeze your breath in your lungs," Zachary confirmed. "Snow piles up higher than a horse's head. Some years you cannot move the herds for months at a time, just have to hope you laid in enough hay to last. Prefer it here," Porter said. "Rather deal with heat than cold any day. At least here you can work year-round." "Except when there is no water," Sam interjected from down the table. "Drought like this might as well be winter. Cattle are struggling, grass is dying. Whole operation could go under if we do not get rain soon." "That is enough of that kind of talk," Thomas said sharply. "We have weathered droughts before, we will weather this one. Spring has never failed us yet, and I do not believe it will fail us now. Just need to be smart about how we manage until the weather breaks." Hannah served second helpings, moving around the table with practiced efficiency. When she reached Zachary, he looked up at her with genuine appreciation. "Best meal I have had in months, madam. Your mother must have taught you well." The compliment was simple, but Hannah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. "Thank you. I do my best." After supper, the men drifted out to the bunkhouse or the porch, some smoking, others playing cards or just enjoying the relative cool of the evening. Hannah cleaned up the kitchen, washing dishes in the big stone sink, her mind wandering as her hands worked through the familiar task. "Need any help with those?" She turned to find Zachary standing in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncertain about whether he should be there. "You should be resting," Hannah said, though she did not quite manage to make it sound like a dismissal. "You rode all day to get here, you must be exhausted." "Too keyed up to sleep just yet," Zachary admitted. "New place, new people. Always takes me a while to settle in. Figured I might as well make myself useful." Hannah considered sending him away, maintaining the proper boundaries between the rancher's daughter and the hired help. But there was something appealing about the company, about not being alone in the kitchen for once. "You can dry," she said, gesturing to the stack of clean dishes waiting on the counter. "Towels are in that drawer." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, falling into an easy rhythm. Hannah washed, Zachary dried and stacked. Through the window, the sky was turning the deep purple of full twilight, stars beginning to emerge in the gathering darkness. "Your father seems like a fair man," Zachary said after a while. "The other hands, they respect him. You can tell. He is fair," Hannah agreed. "Tough but fair. He expects a lot, but he pays well and treats people decently. That is more than can be said for some ranchers around here." "And you run the household?" Zachary asked. "That is a lot of responsibility." "Someone has to do it," Hannah said. "After Mama died, there was no one else." Pa offered to hire a housekeeper, but this is my home. I wanted to take care of it myself. No interest in getting married, having a home of your own. It was a bold question, but Zachary asked it casually, without any of the loaded implications that usually accompanied such inquiries. Hannah found herself answering honestly. There are not exactly a lot of prospects out here, she said. The men in town, they either want some delicate flower who will faint at the sight of blood, or they want free labor. I have never been delicate, and I already work hard enough without adding some man's household to my responsibilities. Zachary chuckled, a low sound that Hannah found surprisingly pleasant. Fair enough. For what it is worth, I think any man would be lucky to have someone as capable as you. The compliment caught Hannah off guard, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks again. To cover her confusion, she scrubbed harder at the pot she was washing, focusing on removing a stubborn bit of burnt stew. "What about you?" she asked, turning the tables. "You ever think about settling down, or are you committed to the drifting life?" "I think about it," Zachary said quietly. "More than I probably should. But settling down requires roots, requires belonging somewhere. I have been moving so long, I am not sure I remember how to stay still." There was something wistful in his voice, something that made Hannah want to know more about what had set him on this wandering path. But before she could ask, her father's voice called from the front room. "Hannah, you about finished in there. Need you to look over the books with me." "Coming, Pa," she called back, then turned to Zachary. "Thank you for the help." "Anytime," he said, hanging up the drying towel. "Sleep well, Miss Hannah." "Just Hannah is fine," she said impulsively. "When it is not around the other hands, I mean. No need for such formality." Something shifted in Zachary's expression, a warmth entering those gray eyes. "Then just Hannah it is, and I am just Zachary when we are speaking privately, or Zach if you prefer." "Good night, Zach," Hannah said, testing the name on her tongue and finding she liked the feel of it. "Good night, Hannah." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. The hands rose before dawn, ate the breakfast Hannah prepared, then scattered to their various tasks. Zachary proved to be everything he had claimed, a skilled and tireless worker who could turn his hand to whatever needed doing. Cal, the foreman, had initially been skeptical of the drifter, but even he admitted after the first week that Zachary knew his business. Hannah found herself watching for Zachary more than she cared to admit. She noticed the way he gentled a nervous horse with patience and soft words. She saw how he helped Jimmy repair a section of fence without being asked, how he stayed late to check on a cow having difficulty calving, ensuring both mother and calf came through safely. And she noticed how he kept finding excuses to help her. He would volunteer to carry heavy items, to chop extra firewood, to reach things from high shelves. Never in a way that suggested he thought her incapable, but with a courtesy that felt genuine rather than calculated. "That new fellow seems to have taken a shine to you," her father observed one evening as they reviewed the ranch accounts. "Seen him hanging around the house more than necessary." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "He is just being helpful, Pa. Nothing wrong with that." "Did not say there was," Thomas replied, giving her a shrewd look over the top of his reading glasses. "Seems like a decent man. Hard worker, does not shirk, does not cause trouble. Cal says he is good with the horses, has a knack for reading them." "That is good," Hannah said neutrally, trying to focus on the column of numbers in front of her. "Could do worse, is all I am saying." "Pa," Hannah looked up, scandalized. "He has only been here 3 weeks. I know. Thomas held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just making an observation. You are 22, Hannah. I worry about you being alone when I am gone." "You are not going anywhere for a long time," Hannah said firmly, not wanting to think about a future without her father. "And I am perfectly fine on my own." But later that night, Lying in her bed and listening to the coyotes howl in the distance, Hannah found herself thinking about what her father had said. She was fine on her own, that much was true. But was fine the same as happy? Was capable the same as content? The next day, she was working in the vegetable garden behind the house, trying to coax something edible from the drought-stressed plants, when Zachary rode up leading a second horse. "Afternoon," he called, dismounting with an easy grace. "Cal asked me to ride out and check the fence line on the north pasture. Wondered if you might want to come along, get out of the house for a bit." Hannah sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. The invitation was unexpected and probably not entirely proper, but the thought of an afternoon away from her endless chores was powerfully tempting. "I should ask Pa," she said, though she was already mentally running through what needed doing and calculating what could wait. "Already did," Zachary said with a slight smile. "He said it was fine, long as we are back before supper. Said you have been working too hard and could use a break." That sounded exactly like something her father would say, and Hannah felt a rush of affection for him. "Give me 10 minutes to change and tell him where I am going." She returned wearing her riding skirt and boots, her hair braided down her back and her hat pulled low against the sun. Zachary had saddled her mare, Daisy, a gentle chestnut with a calm disposition and steady gait. They rode out across the valley, following the fence line that marked the northern boundary of Zimmerman land. The day was hot, as every day had been hot for months, but there was something freeing about being out in the open country, away from the confines of the house and the demands of the kitchen. "Your father built something impressive here," Zachary said as they rode. "Takes a special kind of determination to carve a working ranch out of this country." "It nearly killed him those first few years," Hannah said. "Or so my mother used to tell me. The land was raw, untamed. They lived in a tent while he built the house, worked from sunup to sundown just to survive. But he had a vision of what it could become, and he made it happen through pure stubborn will." "You take after him, I think," Zachary observed. "That determination." "Is that a compliment or an insult?" Hannah asked, amused. "Definitely a compliment. Takes strength to do what you do, running a household, cooking for that many people every day, managing the accounts. Most women would crumble under that kind of responsibility." "Most women are not raised on a ranch," Hannah countered. "You learn to pull your weight or everything falls apart. No room for being delicate when there is work that needs doing." They fell into a comfortable silence, riding side by side through the sage and scattered juniper. The fence line was in reasonable shape, though they stopped twice to make minor repairs where winter weather and wandering cattle had taken their toll. Around mid-afternoon, they reached a spot where a small creek, barely more than a trickle in the drought, carved a path down from the hills. A few cottonwood trees grew along its banks, offering precious shade. "Want to rest the horses?" Zachary suggested. "We made good time." They dismounted and let the horses drink from the creek while they settled in the shade of the largest cottonwood. Hannah pulled out the canteen she had brought and took a long drink before offering it to Zachary. "Can I ask you something?" she said, watching a hawk circle high overhead. "And you can tell me if I am being too nosy." "Ask away," Zachary said, though she saw a wariness enter his eyes. "Why are you really drifting? I do not believe that story about just wanting to see the country. There is something else, something you are not saying." For a long moment she thought he would not answer. He stared out at the valley spread below them, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with old pain. "I was engaged once," he said. "Girl named Rebecca back in Colorado. I was 21, she was 19. We had known each other our whole lives, grew up on neighboring ranches. Everyone said we were perfect for each other." I believed it too. He paused, and Hannah waited, sensing there was more to come. Her father had a bigger spread than mine, more land, more cattle. After my father died and I inherited our small ranch, Rebecca's father suggested we merge the operations. Made sense in a business kind of way. Except, about a month before the wedding, I overheard Rebecca talking to her sister. She was laughing about how lucky she was, that she would get everything she wanted without having to marry someone poor. Hannah felt a sharp pang of sympathy. Oh, Zach. Turns out the whole thing had been her father's idea from the start, Zachary continued. He wanted my land, the access it gave to the water rights my father had secured. Rebecca went along with it because, as she told her sister, at least I was better looking than some of her other options. The fact that she did not actually love me was just a minor inconvenience. What did you do? Called off the wedding. Sold the ranch to her father for fair market value, took the money and left. Been working my way across the West ever since, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. Figured if I keep moving, I cannot get hurt again. Hannah understood then, understood the careful walls he had built around himself, the way he held himself slightly apart even while being friendly and helpful. He was protecting himself the only way he knew how. Not everyone is like Rebecca, she said softly. I know that in my head, Zachary replied. But knowing something and believing it are two different things. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the whisper of wind through the cottonwood leaves and the creek trickling over stones. Hannah found herself wanting to say something profound, something that would ease the hurt she heard in his voice, but words seemed inadequate. Thank you for telling me, she finally said. I know it could not have been easy. It was not, Zachary admitted. But somehow with you it felt right. You are easy to talk to, Hannah. I do not usually open up like that. We should probably head back, Hannah said, though she was reluctant to leave the peaceful spot. Supper will not cook itself. The ride back was quieter, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But there was a new understanding between them now, a foundation of trust that had not been there before. Over the next several weeks, that foundation deepened. Zachary and Hannah found themselves seeking out each other's company more and more. He would appear in the kitchen after supper to help with dishes, and they would talk about everything and nothing. Their childhoods, their dreams, books they had read, places they had seen or wanted to see. Sometimes they would take evening walks, strolling through the ranch property as the sun set and the air finally cooled. Zachary told her stories about his travels, about the different ranches where he had worked, the different people he had met. Hannah shared memories of her mother, stories about growing up on the ranch, her hopes for its future. You ever think about leaving? Zachary asked one evening as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Seeing what else is out there. Sometimes, Hannah admitted. When I was younger, I used to dream about going to San Francisco, seeing the ocean. But this ranch, it is in my blood. I cannot imagine being anywhere else, not really. This is home. Must be nice, Zachary said wistfully. Having a place that feels like home. You could have that, Hannah said, looking at him in the starlight. If you wanted it. If you stopped running long enough to let it happen. Maybe, Zachary said, but there was doubt in his voice. Or maybe some people are just meant to drift. September gave way to October, and with it came preparations for Roundup. Every available hand was needed to gather the cattle from the far reaches of the ranch, to sort them for sale or keeping, to brand the new calves that had been born during the year. It was hard, dirty, exhausting work that started before dawn and often lasted until after dark. Hannah worked as hard as any of the men, riding alongside them, helping with the branding, cooking enormous meals to keep everyone fed and functional. She found herself often partnered with Zachary during the gather, and she could not help but notice how well they worked together. He seemed to anticipate her movements, and she his, operating with the kind of seamless coordination that usually took years to develop. "You two are like a well-oiled machine," Cal observed one afternoon, watching them work a stubborn steer out of a thicket. "Do not think I have ever seen someone mesh that quick with Hannah. Usually takes months before she trusts someone enough to work that close." Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she could not deny the truth of what Cal was saying. She did trust Zachary more than she had trusted anyone outside her family in a long time. And if the feeling she was developing went beyond simple trust, well, she was doing her best not to examine that too closely. One evening during Roundup, as they were all sitting around the campfire eating supper, Sam started causing trouble. He had been drinking, though where he had gotten the whiskey was anyone's guess, and he was in a combative mood. "So, Lawson," Sam said, his words slightly slurred, "when you planning on moving on, drifters never stay long. Something better always comes along, right?" "I will stay as long as Mr. Zimmerman needs me," Zachary replied evenly, not rising to the bait. "That's so," Sam persisted. "Or are you maybe staying for a different reason? Maybe someone specific?" The implication was clear, and Hannah felt anger flash through her. Before she could say anything, her father intervened. "That is enough, Sam," Thomas said sharply. "You are drunk. Get yourself to bed before you say something that will get you fired." Sam opened his mouth as if to argue, then apparently thought better of it. He stumbled off toward his bedroll, leaving an uncomfortable silence around the fire. "Sorry about that, Zachary," Thomas said. "Sam is usually a decent hand when he is sober." "No apology needed, sir," Zachary replied. "I have dealt with worse." But later, when most of the camp had settled down for the night, Hannah found Zachary sitting alone, staring at the fire. "Do not let Sam get to you," she said softly, settling down beside him. "He is just jealous. He tried to court me last year and I turned him down flat. He has held a grudge ever since." "Is that what we are doing?" Zachary asked, looking at her intently. "Courting," the question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Hannah knew her answer mattered, knew that what she said next could change everything. "I think maybe we are," she said carefully. "If that is something you want, if you are planning to stay." "I do not know if I know how to stay," Zachary said honestly. "Part of me wants to more than I can say. But the other part, the part that got hurt, that part keeps telling me to leave before I get in too deep." "And which part is winning?" Hannah asked, her heart beating faster. "The wanting to stay part," Zachary admitted. "Against all my better judgment I want to stay for you, because of you." Hannah felt something tight in her chest loosen, some fear she had not fully acknowledged releasing its grip. "Then stay, at least for now, at least through the winter. We can figure out the rest as we go." "One more season," Zachary said, as much to himself as to her. "I can do one more season." "Just one more season," Hannah agreed, though in her heart she was already hoping for many more than that. Roundup finished successfully. The cattle sorted and the calves branded, the herd tallied and accounted for. The ranch had weathered the drought better than some, thanks to the spring that continued to flow, though at reduced capacity. As October gave way to November, the weather finally began to change. The first rain in nearly 5 months came on a Tuesday night, waking Hannah from a sound sleep. She lay in bed listening to the drops patter against her window, feeling tears of relief slide down her cheeks. The drought had broken. By morning, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle that would last for 2 days, soaking into the parched earth, filling the creeks and water holes, bringing new life to the exhausted land. The mood at the ranch lifted immediately, everyone grinning and joking despite being soaked through. "Thank God," her father said over breakfast that first morning, watching the rain fall through the dining room window. "Another month and we would have been in real trouble, but this will carry us through." As November progressed, the relationship between Hannah and Zachary deepened. They were careful to be discreet around the other hands, but everyone on the ranch knew something was developing between them. Her father said nothing directly, but Hannah caught him watching them sometimes with an expression of quiet approval. One Saturday, Thomas gave Hannah the day off, insisting she take a break from the endless cooking and cleaning. Zachary, without being asked, offered to take her into Belmont for the day. "We can have lunch at the hotel restaurant," he suggested. "Make a proper day of it. If you want to, that is." Hannah wanted to very much. She dressed in her best dress, a dark blue calico that her mother had helped her make years ago, and pinned her hair up in a style that was both practical and pretty. When she came down the stairs, she found Zachary waiting by the wagon, wearing clean clothes and looking nervous. "You look beautiful," he said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made Hannah's heart flutter. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, climbing up onto the wagon seat. The ride into Belmont took about an hour, and they spent it talking easily, the conversation flowing as naturally as water. Hannah found herself laughing more than she had in years, responding to Zachary's dry humor and wry observations about ranch life. In town, they caused something of a stir. Hannah Zimmerman was well known and well liked, and seeing her on what was clearly a social outing with one of her father's hands set tongues wagging immediately. But Hannah found she did not care. Let people talk. She was happy, happier than she had been in a long time, and she was not going to hide that to satisfy the gossips. They ate lunch at the Nevada Hotel, a surprisingly good meal of roast chicken and vegetables. Afterward, they walked down the main street, stopping in at the general store where Hannah needed to order some supplies, then at the feed store where Zachary handled some business for Cal. "Want to see something?" Zachary asked as they were walking back to the wagon. "Something I have been working on but have not shown anyone yet. Curious." Hannah nodded. Zachary led her to the livery stable at the edge of town, where he spoke briefly to the owner before leading her to one of the back stalls. Inside was a beautiful saddle, the leather still pale with newness but already showing the marks of careful tooling. The design was intricate, a pattern of desert flowers and running horses, every detail precise and elegant. "You made this?" Hannah asked, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "Been working on it in the evenings after everyone else has gone to sleep," Zachary admitted. "Saddle making was something my father taught me. He said a man should always have a skill beyond cowboying, something that could earn money when the ranch work dried up. I have been thinking maybe I could make a go of it, making custom saddles. There is always a market for good leather work." "It is beautiful," Hannah said sincerely. "You have real talent, Zach. You could absolutely sell these." "I was thinking," Zachary said, suddenly looking shy. "If I could build up a saddle-making business on the side, save up enough money, maybe I could think about putting down roots. Maybe here, if your father would consider selling me a piece of land. Nothing big, just enough for a small house, a workshop." Hannah's heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. "You are thinking about staying, really staying, not just one more season?" "I am thinking about it," Zachary said carefully. "If you think, that is, if you would want. I am making a mess of this, I know." "You are doing fine," Hannah said softly. "And yes, I would want that, very much." Zachary let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. "I have not felt this way since Rebecca. Did not think I ever would again. But you, Hannah, you have gotten under my skin in the best possible way. I think about you all the time, dream about you. You have become the reason I want to stay in one place." "I feel the same way," Hannah admitted. I did not expect this, did not expect you. But now that you are here, I cannot imagine the ranch without you, cannot imagine my life without you in it." Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she did not, he cupped her face in his hands, his callous thumbs gentle against her cheeks. "Can I kiss you?" "I wish you would," Hannah breathed. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Zachary pulled her closer and Hannah melted into him, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Stay just one more season," he murmured. "That is what you said." "But I do not want just one more season, Hannah. I want all of them. Every season for the rest of my life." "Then stay," Hannah said simply. "Stay and we will have them." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them processing what had just happened, what they had admitted to each other. When they arrived home, Thomas took one look at their faces and started grinning. "About damn time," he said. "Was starting to think you two were never going to figure it out." Winter came to Nevada with surprising gentleness that year. The rains continued periodically through December, and by January the valley was green in a way it had not been in over a year. The cattle fattened up, the horses grew sleek, and the spring flowed strong and clear. Zachary settled into life on the ranch with an ease that surprised even him. The nightmares about Rebecca that had plagued him for years began to fade, replaced by dreams of a different future. He worked on saddles in the evenings, and word of his skills spread. Soon, he had orders coming in from neighboring ranches, enough that he could see how a real business might develop. Thomas Zimmerman watched the growing relationship between his daughter and his hired hand with quiet satisfaction. He had Zachary over for dinner regularly, asking him about his plans, his goals, making it clear that if the young man's intentions toward Hannah were serious, they would be welcomed. "I know I am just a drifting cowboy with not much to my name," Zachary said one evening in February when Thomas had cornered him in the barn. "But I love your daughter, sir. I want to marry her if she will have me and if you will give your blessing." "You are not just a drifting cowboy anymore," Thomas replied. "You are a good man who works hard, who treats my daughter with respect, and who has proven he can be depended on. Far as I am concerned, you are exactly the kind of man I hoped Hannah would find. You have my blessing, Zachary. And more than that, you have my respect." Zachary proposed on a Saturday evening in early March. He took Hannah back to the spot by the creek where they had first really talked, where he had told her about Rebecca, and she had listened without judgment. The cottonwoods were just beginning to bud out, tiny green leaves unfurling toward the spring sun. "I know I am not much of a catch," Zachary said, dropping to one knee on the creek bank. "I do not have a fancy house or a big bank account. But I have two good hands, a trade I am building, and a heart that belongs completely to you. Will you marry me, Hannah? Will you take a chance on a reformed drifter who wants nothing more than to spend the rest of his life making you happy?" "Yes," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course, yes. You are exactly what I want, Zach, exactly who I want." The ring he slipped onto her finger was simple, a silver band he had made himself in the livery stable's forge, set with a small turquoise stone. It was not fancy or expensive, but it was perfect, made with his own hands just for her. They were married in June, on a perfect Nevada day when the sky was impossibly blue and wildflowers painted the valley in shades of yellow and purple. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with all the hands in attendance along with half the town of Belmont. Hannah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried a bouquet of those same wildflowers. When the preacher asked if she took this man, Hannah looked into Zachary's gray eyes and saw their whole future reflected there. "I do," she said firmly, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I do," Zachary echoed when his turn came, his voice rough with emotion. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Thomas Zimmerman stood on the porch watching his daughter dance with her new husband, and felt at peace for the first time since his wife had died. Hannah would be taken care of, loved by a good man who would stand beside her through whatever life brought. As a wedding gift, Thomas deeded 10 acres on the eastern edge of the ranch property to Zachary and Hannah. Good land with access to water and a beautiful view of the valley. Over the summer and fall, Zachary built them a house, a solid structure of stone and timber that echoed the main ranch house, but was entirely their own. The other hands helped, of course, including Sam, who had gotten over his jealousy and apologized for his behavior during Roundup. By the time winter came again, the house was finished, complete with a workshop where Zachary could craft his saddles and a large kitchen where Hannah could cook to her heart's content. They moved in just before Christmas, and Hannah stood in the doorway of their new home feeling a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged with this man, building a life together on land that had been in her family for 3 decades. "Happy?" Zachary asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Deliriously," Hannah replied, leaning back against him. "Are you? Any regrets about giving up the drifting life?" "Not a single one," Zachary said firmly. "I have everything I ever wanted right here. A home, a wife I love more than I can say, work that satisfies me, and roots that go down deep. I am exactly where I am meant to be." The first year of their marriage was everything Hannah had hoped it would be and more. She continued to help run the main ranch house during the day, cooking for the hands and managing the household. But now, she had her own home to return to at night, her own space that was just hers and Zachary's. Zachary's saddle-making business thrived. He had more orders than he could easily handle, and people were willing to pay premium prices for his work. The income, combined with his wages from the ranch, meant they were building a comfortable nest egg. In the spring of their second year together, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the valley. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Zachary's face went through a series of expressions, shock to wonder to pure joy, so quickly that Hannah had to laugh. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Really sure, I am sure," Hannah confirmed. "The doctor in Belmont confirmed it yesterday. Baby should come in late October, early November." Zachary pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a family." "We already have a family," Hannah reminded him. "But yes, we are going to add to it." Thomas Zimmerman was overjoyed at the news that he was going to be a grandfather. He immediately began planning, insisting that they add a room onto Hannah and Zachary's house for the baby, refusing to take no for an answer. "A child needs space to grow," he insisted. "And you are going to need somewhere for all the baby things. Besides, gives me an excuse to do some building. I have missed working with my hands." The summer passed in a haze of preparation. Hannah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong. Infant mortality was high, she knew, and childbirth itself was dangerous. But she tried to focus on the positive, on the life growing inside her, on the future they were building. Zachary hovered, protective and worried in a way that was both endearing and occasionally irritating. He wanted to wrap her in cotton wool, keep her from doing any work at all, but Hannah refused to be treated like an invalid. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, she told him firmly when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. I am pregnant, not dying. I can still do my normal work. I just want you to be safe, Zachary said. You and the baby are the most important things in the world to me. We will be safe, Hannah assured him. I am strong and the doctor says everything looks good. Try not to worry so much. But as her belly grew and the baby's movements became more pronounced, Hannah found herself sharing some of Zachary's anxiety. This tiny life depended on her completely, and the weight of that responsibility was sometimes overwhelming. On a cold November night, 3 days after her due date, Hannah's labor began. It started as a dull ache in her back that gradually intensified into something that took her breath away. Zachary immediately rode for the doctor while Thomas sat with Hannah, holding her hand and offering what comfort he could. Your mother went through this, Thomas said during a particularly intense contraction, bringing you into the world. I remember feeling so helpless, like there should be something I could do but knowing there was not. But she was strong, and you are strong, and you will get through this. The doctor arrived within an hour, and he confirmed that labor was progressing normally. What followed were the longest hours of Hannah's life. Pain unlike anything she had ever experienced, waves of intensity that seemed to go on forever. Zachary stayed with her despite the doctor's suggestion that he wait elsewhere. He held her hand, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, whispered encouragement when she was sure she could not go on. You can do this, he told her over and over. You are the strongest person I know. Just a little longer, love. Just a little longer. Finally, as dawn was breaking on a new day, Hannah gave one last tremendous push and heard the sound she had been waiting for, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn baby. It is a boy, the doctor announced, holding up the squirming infant. A healthy baby boy. Zachary was crying, tears streaming down his face as the doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket. When he placed the infant in Hannah's arms, she felt a love so fierce it was almost frightening, a primal need to protect this tiny person at any cost. He is perfect, she whispered, looking down at the baby's wrinkled red face, his shock of dark hair, his tiny fists waving in the air. He looks like you, Zachary said, his voice thick with emotion. He has your nose. They named him Joshua Thomas Lawson after Zachary's father and Hannah's. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with a set of lungs that could wake the entire house when he was hungry. Thomas Zimmerman was a doting grandfather, coming by almost every day to check on his grandson. He would sit for hours just holding the baby, talking to him in a soft voice about the ranch and the cattle and all the things they would do together when Joshua was older. He will grow up knowing this land, Thomas said one afternoon as he rocked Joshua on the porch. Just like you did, Hannah. 4th generation on this ranch. That is something to be proud of. The years that followed were full and rich. Joshua grew into a bright, curious child who was happiest when he was outside, exploring the ranch with his grandfather or watching his father work leather in the workshop. When he was 3, Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose, who had her father's gray eyes and a temperament as sweet as honey. 2 years after Sarah came another son, Matthew, who was quieter than his siblings, but just as loved. The house that had seemed so spacious when it was just Hannah and Zachary now rang with the sounds of children, with laughter and occasional tears, with the chaos and joy of family life. Zachary's saddle-making business had grown to the point where he could no longer manage it alone. He took on an apprentice, a young man from town who showed real talent for the work. Together they filled orders from across Nevada and even from as far away as California, their reputation for quality work spreading throughout the West. Hannah continued to help at the main ranch house, though with 3 children her time was more limited. She hired a woman from town to help with the cooking and cleaning, freeing her to focus on her own family while still supporting her father. Thomas Zimmerman aged gracefully, his hair going white but his mind staying sharp. He officially made Zachary his partner in the ranch operation when Joshua turned 5, giving him an equal say in decisions and an equal share of the profits. It was a gesture that moved Zachary deeply, a concrete acknowledgement that he was family, that he belonged. "You have earned this 10 times over," Thomas told him when he handed over the paperwork. "This ranch is stronger because of you, and I want to make sure you and Hannah are taken care of, no matter what happens to me." "Nothing is going to happen to you, Pa," Hannah said firmly. "You are too ornery to die," Thomas laughed. "Maybe so, but a man likes to have his affairs in order. Gives me peace of mind, knowing you are all provided for." One evening when Joshua was 7, Sarah was 4, and Matthew was 2, the whole family gathered on the porch of Hannah and Zachary's house. The children were chasing fireflies in the twilight while the adults sat in rocking chairs, watching them play. "You ever think about that day you rode into Belmont?" Hannah asked Zachary, taking his hand. "If you had kept riding, gone to a different town, what might have happened?" "I think about it sometimes," Zachary admitted, "but only to be grateful that I did not, that I stopped here, that your father gave me a chance, that you gave me a chance. Everything good in my life came from that decision. You saved me too," Hannah said softly. "I did not realize how lonely I was until you showed me what it felt like to not be lonely anymore." Thomas Zimmerman, sitting on the other side of Hannah, cleared his throat. "Both of you needed each other. Could see it from the first day. Hannah needed someone who saw her for who she really was, who appreciated her strength instead of being threatened by it. And Zachary needed a reason to stop running, needed to remember that he was worth loving." "You took a chance on me," Zachary said to Thomas. "A drifting cowboy with not much to his name. You could have sent me on my way, but you did not. That choice changed everything." "Best hiring decision I ever made," Thomas replied. "Got myself a fine ranch manager, a good son, and grandchildren to spoil. Can't ask for more than that." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, Hannah looked around at her family. Her father, still strong despite his years. Her husband, the drifter who had stayed. Her children, healthy and happy, growing up with the freedom and security she had known as a child. This was what mattered, she thought. Not grand adventures or exciting stories, but this: family, love, home. The simple, profound beauty of belonging to each other. Joshua came running up to the porch, a firefly cupped carefully in his hands. "Look, Mama, I caught one." "That is wonderful, sweetheart," Hannah said. "Now let it go so it can find its family." Joshua carefully opened his hands and the firefly took off, its light blinking on and off as it rose into the dark sky. Sarah and Matthew came tumbling up behind him, breathless and laughing, demanding to be tucked into bed. The nighttime routine was familiar and comforting. Baths in the big tin tub, pajamas that smelled like sun-dried cotton, bedtime stories read by lamplight. Hannah and Zachary took turns, each handling one child while the other managed the remaining 2. Finally, with all 3 children settled in their beds, Hannah and Zachary returned to the porch where Thomas still sat, smoking his pipe and looking out over the darkened valley. "Beautiful night," Thomas observed. "Reminds me of nights when Hannah's mother was alive, when it was just the 3 of us. We would sit out here and plan the future, dream about what the ranch could become." He paused, tamping down the tobacco in his pipe. "Never imagined it would become this, though. Family spreading across the property, grandchildren carrying on the legacy. It is more than I dreamed of. "You built something lasting," Zachary said. "Something that will outlive all of us. That is no small thing." "We built it," Thomas corrected. "You and Hannah and me, all of us together. That is how the best things are made, not by one person alone, but by people working together toward a common goal." Hannah leaned her head on Zachary's shoulder, feeling utterly content. The night air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle. This was her world, these were her people, and she could not imagine being anywhere else. Time continued its relentless forward march. The children grew, the ranch prospered, the seasons turned one into another. Joshua showed a real talent for working with horses, spending hours in the corral with his grandfather, learning to gentle them with patience and respect. Sarah proved to have inherited her father's artistic abilities, drawing pictures of everything she saw and showing an interest in leather tooling that delighted Zachary. Matthew was the bookish one, always asking questions about everything, wanting to understand how things worked. When Joshua turned 10, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise that shocked everyone given that Matthew was nearly 6 by then. "Apparently we are not quite done yet," she told Zachary, part amused and part apprehensive. She was 33 now, and while that was not ancient, it was older than she had been with the previous 3. "Another blessing," Zachary said, his hand gentle on her belly. "We have room for one more." This pregnancy was harder than the others, with more aches and more exhaustion. But when Hannah gave birth to twin girls in the spring of 1894, she felt it had all been worth it. They named them Emma and Grace, and they were identical in appearance but different in temperament from the first moment they drew breath. The house burst at the seams with 5 children, and they added on yet again, this time a whole second story with bedrooms enough for everyone. The original small house where Hannah and Zachary had started their married life had transformed into a sprawling home that rang with life and love. Thomas Zimmerman lived long enough to see all 5 grandchildren, to hold the twins and tell them stories just as he had their older siblings. But in the fall of 1897, at the age of 68, he suffered a stroke while out riding fence line. Cal found him slumped in the saddle, his horse standing patiently beside a gate. They brought him back to the main house, and the doctor came, but there was little to be done. Thomas had lost the ability to speak, his right side paralyzed, though his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had always defined him. Hannah sat with him for 3 days, holding his hand, telling him about the children, about the ranch, about everything she wanted him to know. Zachary was there too, and the children came one by one to say goodbye to their grandfather. On the 3rd evening, as the sun was setting over the valley he had loved so much, Thomas Zimmerman slipped away peacefully. Hannah was holding one hand, Zachary the other, and they both felt the moment he left, a subtle shift as his spirit departed for whatever came next. The funeral was attended by half the county. Thomas Zimmerman had been a respected man, known for his fairness and his integrity. People came from ranches 50 miles away to pay their respects, to share stories of his kindness or his shrewd business sense. They buried him on a hill overlooking the valley, next to Hannah's mother, where he could watch over the land he had tamed and the family he had built. Hannah stood at the graveside with Zachary's arm around her, her children clustered close, and felt the weight of the legacy her father had left behind. "He was so proud of you," Cal said after the service, his own eyes red from crying. "Used to tell me all the time how lucky he was that you and Zachary found each other, how perfect it all worked out. Said he could die content knowing the ranch was in good hands. We will take care of it," Hannah promised. "We will honor what he built," and they did. Under Hannah and Zachary's management, the ranch continued to thrive. They ran it together, making decisions jointly, playing to each other's strengths. Zachary handled the livestock and the land management while Hannah managed the business side, the accounts and contracts and negotiations. The saddle-making business had grown into a full-fledged workshop that employed 3 craftsmen and produced some of the finest custom saddles in Nevada. It operated out of a new building they had constructed near the main barn, and while Zachary still did the most intricate work himself, he had trained his apprentices well. Joshua, when he turned 18 in 1901, announced that he wanted to be a full partner in the ranch operations. He had grown into a tall, capable young man who knew cattle and horses like he knew his own name. Zachary and Hannah welcomed him as an equal, giving him real responsibility and trusting his judgment. Sarah, at 15, was still working on her leather craft, creating beautiful tooled belts and wallets that sold for good prices in Belmont and beyond. She talked about opening her own shop someday, about being a businesswoman in her own right. Matthew, at 13, had his nose constantly in books, talking about going to university back east, about studying engineering or law. Hannah encouraged this, wanting her children to have choices she had never had. The twins, Emma and Grace, were only 7 but already showing distinct personalities. Emma was adventurous, always climbing trees or riding horses too fast, while Grace was gentler, preferring to help in the kitchen or care for the chickens. One evening in the spring of 1903, Hannah and Zachary sat on their porch, watching the sun set just as they had done hundreds of times before. They were in their 40s now, their hair showing threads of silver, their hands showing the wear of years of hard work. But they were still strong, still vital, still deeply in love. "You remember what I said that first roundup?" Zachary asked, taking Hannah's hand. "About staying just one more season." "I remember," Hannah said, smiling at the memory. "I said you should stay at least through the winter. And you said one more season, you could do one more season." "That was 20 years ago," Zachary marveled. 20 years of seasons, and I have not wanted to leave for a single one of them. You gave me something I did not think I could have after Rebecca. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to believe in love again." "You gave me those things too," Hannah said. "I was so lonely before you came, even though I did not fully realize it. I had convinced myself that being capable and independent was enough. But then you showed me that I could be all of those things and still be loved, still be cherished. You never tried to make me smaller or different. You just loved me as I was." "As you are," Zachary corrected. "Present tense always. I love you more now than I did then, if that is possible. Every day with you has been a gift." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. In the distance, they could hear Joshua working with a young horse in the corral, the patient murmur of his voice carrying on the evening air. From inside the house came the sounds of the younger children getting ready for bed, Sarah bossing the twins through their bedtime routine. "This is what I always wanted," Hannah said softly. "Even when I did not know it, this is what I was waiting for. Not some grand adventure or exciting life in the city, but this, family, land, love. The simple, perfect rightness of being exactly where I belong." "We built a good life," Zachary agreed. "Your father would be proud. He is proud," Hannah said with certainty. "Wherever he is proud. And he is at peace, knowing we are taking care of everything he built, carrying it forward for our children and their children after them." As the years continued to unfold, the ranch changed and grew. Joshua married a girl from town, a sweet-natured woman named Margaret, and they built their own house on the ranch property, not far from where Hannah and Zachary had built theirs decades before. They had 3 children in quick succession. giving Hannah and Zachary their first grandchildren and continuing the Zimmerman-Lawson legacy into another generation. Sarah did open her leather goods shop in Belmont when she turned 21, and it became immediately successful. She had a gift for design that surpassed even her father's, creating pieces that were both beautiful and functional. She never married, declaring herself perfectly content with her business and her independence, and Hannah supported that choice wholeheartedly. Matthew did go to university, studying at Stanford in California, becoming a lawyer as he had dreamed. He returned to Nevada to practice, settling in Carson City but visiting the ranch regularly, always bringing stories of the wider world but clearly grateful for the roots he had in Belmont. The twins took very different paths. Emma married young at 18 to a rancher's son from 3 valleys over, and moved away to help him run his family's spread. Grace stayed close to home, taking over management of the main ranch house after Hannah decided to step back, running it with the same competence her mother had shown. Through it all, through weddings and births and the occasional funeral, through droughts and good years, through triumphs and setbacks, Hannah and Zachary remained the steady center. Their love deepened and matured like fine wine, becoming something richer and more complex than the first bright rush of infatuation. They grew old together, their hair turning fully white, their steps becoming slower but no less purposeful. They worked side by side as they always had, partners in every sense of the word, facing whatever life brought with courage and grace. One evening in the spring of 1923, when Hannah was 62 and Zachary was 66, they sat once again on their porch. The house had grown quiet, all their children grown and gone to homes of their own, though they still lived close enough to visit regularly. The ranch was now run primarily by Joshua and his sons, with Zachary in more of an advisory role. 40 years, Zachary said, looking out over the valley bathed in golden evening light. 40 years since I rode into Belmont without a penny to my name or a plan in my head. Best day of my life, seeing you ride in, Hannah said. I knew the moment I looked at you that something was about to change. I just did not know how much, how completely you would transform everything. We transformed each other, Zachary said. I came here broken, convinced I was meant to drift forever. You taught me that home is not a place but the people you choose to love. You gave me roots when I thought I would never have them again. And you gave me wings, Hannah replied. Showed me that being strong did not mean being alone, that I could be fully myself and still be loved completely. They fell silent, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The valley stretched before them, green and lush after a wet spring, the cattle scattered across the pastures like dark stones. This land, this place, had been their lives' work, their legacy, the foundation on which they had built everything that mattered. You have any regrets? Hannah asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Not a single one, Zachary said firmly. Every choice I made led me to you, to this life. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a thing. Me neither, Hannah agreed. I would choose you again and again in every lifetime. They sat together as the stars came out, as they had done thousands of times before, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in comfortable synchrony. Around them, the ranch settled into night sounds, cattle lowing softly, horses shifting in their stalls, crickets beginning their evening song. The drifter had found his home. The rancher's daughter had found her partner, and together they had built something that would outlast them both. A family, a legacy, a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. It was a life well lived, a love well earned, and as Hannah looked at Zachary in the starlight, She thought that there was no greater blessing than to grow old beside someone who knew you completely and loved you anyway. "Stay just one more season," she whispered, echoing the words from so long ago. "Just one more season," Zachary agreed, smiling. "And then another after that and another after that, for as many seasons as we are given." And as the Nevada night deepened around them, they sat together in perfect contentment. Two souls who had found exactly what they needed in each other, partners and lovers and best friends, now and always. The end came for both of them gently, as these things sometimes do for people who have loved well and lived fully. Zachary passed first, in his sleep during the winter of 1928, at the age of 71. Hannah found him in the morning, peaceful and still, and while her heart broke, she was grateful that he had gone without pain, without fear, simply slipping from sleep into whatever came after. She lived 2 more years without him, years that felt both endless and impossibly brief. Her children and grandchildren rallied around her, making sure she was never alone, but there was an emptiness that nothing could fill. She had lost her other half, the person who had made sense of her world for nearly half a century. On a spring morning in 1930, Hannah Zimmerman Lawson died quietly in her sleep, in the house she and Zachary had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their life. Photographs on the walls, furniture they had chosen together, the view out the window of the valley they had loved. They buried her next to Zachary, on the hill overlooking the ranch, near where her parents rested. The whole county came to the funeral, 3 generations of people whose lives she had touched in some way. Her children stood together at the graveside, united in their grief, but also in their gratitude for the example she and Zachary had set. "They loved each other more than anyone I have ever known," Joshua said during the service, his voice breaking slightly. "From the moment Dad rode into town until the moment Mom drew her last breath, they loved each other with a fierceness and a constancy that was inspiring to witness. They showed us what marriage should be, what partnership looks like, what it means to build a life with someone who sees you and values you for exactly who you are." As the last prayer was said, and the last handful of earth scattered over the grave, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the valley in golden light. And if anyone had been listening very carefully, they might have heard, carried on the spring breeze, the sound of laughter. 2 voices, intertwined, joyful and young again, finally reunited in whatever came after. The ranch continues to this day, still run by descendants of Hannah Zimmerman and Zachary Lawson, still thriving in the Nevada Valley where it all began. In the main house hangs a portrait of the 2 of them, painted when they were in their 50s, standing together with the ranch spread out behind them. Hannah's hand rests on Zachary's shoulder, his hand covers hers, and both of them are smiling, their love evident in every line of their faces. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right across the valley, workers on the ranch swear they can see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old house, rocking gently, hands intertwined, watching over the land and the family they built together, their love as eternal as the Nevada sky above them. This is their story, the rancher's daughter and the drifting cowboy who finally found a reason to stay, the woman who needed to be seen and the man who needed to believe again. 2 broken pieces that fit together perfectly, creating something whole and beautiful and lasting. They asked him to stay just 1 more season, and he stayed for a lifetime. And that, in the end, is the greatest love story of all.